to a Hope 1032 podcast.
Hello, welcome to Season 5 of Raising Teens. I'm your host, Collett Smart. I'm a psychologist, a teacher, and also a parent in the middle of raising my own teen and young adult children. I started this podcast because I know that many teens are struggling, and I wanted to create an online village of support for parents. I'm joined again this season by well-known experts on teen mental health and well-being. I have such hope for this generation of young people, so each episode is jam-packed with support so that you can get on with the job that you do best. That is, connecting with and loving your teen. Dr Mary Kaspar is a clinical psychologist, researcher, author, and mother to 3 young adult daughters. She's the director of a clinical psychology practice where she works with adults and adolescents, both individually and through her online programs. She's also the author of the best-selling book, The Popular Girls. This book explores relational aggression and its link with status seeking, as well as providing a 7-step framework for meaningful popularity and flourishing. Her goal is to support young people to develop better relationships. Hello, Mary. Welcome to Raising Teens.
Hi, Collett. I'm really excited to be here and I really appreciate the invite. Thank you.
So, Mary, your book is just fantastic, and I've been thinking about my work in schools as a school psychologist and private practice, but even as a mum, I'm so aware of how clearly our teens tend to define what they call the popular group, and then they proceed to have names for the other groups, and then I even watch them. They kind of know exactly who's in each group, where each group sits or hangs out on the school grounds. They know who's on top of the group, who's at the bottom of the group, who's in, who's out. It makes me think of my own high school years. I found high school particularly painful, if I'm honest. It wasn't my favorite years. And I know that there are some teens that really still struggle with where they fit in the hierarchy at school. There can be a bit of a difference in boys' groups compared to girls' groups. So in your book, I was fascinated to see how you talk about likable popularity versus status popularity. Can you just unpack those terms for me a little bit to start off with?
Sure. When young people talk about popularity, they're actually probably more likely talking about status popularity. And that refers to peers in the group that are most socially dominant. So they typically are the most visible in the group. Whereas likability is about those peers that are liked and that make people feel safe, make people feel good about themselves.
Okay, so they're the friends that you feel comfortable with and feel safe with.
Yeah, and that you like.
One of the most beautiful pictures I saw in your book was this idea of the field versus the staircase. Just explain for my listeners that field versus staircase analogy in friendships.
Yeah. So likability is fundamentally a different perspective about relationships. And I do try and describe it as like the concept of more horizontal relationships, with everyone being together on a flat plane as equals, versus status seeking, where it's more about vertical relationships, like some relationships being on a competitive step ladder with some people above and some below.
Yeah. And that just, the field analogy is beautiful because it's, I know in your book you talk about how people can be spread out in different positions, and some are slightly a little bit to the side or some slightly in front or behind, but you're all on a level playing field, even though you have your differences, rather than someone being above you. And you even talk about how on a staircase, you have to fight your way up, and someone has to give their position up from the top step for somebody else to get that position. And yeah, I found that incredibly powerful. Can we talk a little bit about what you mean by the term relational aggression?
So on the stairs, there's more of a scarcity mindset. And it's about that some people get more and some people get less, and there's really not enough room for everybody. And sometimes relational aggression can be part of that, can be part of maintaining a position within a group. So relational aggression is a form of hidden or indirect aggression where someone is harmed through damage to their social relationships, their status within a group, or their inclusion. And the goal of relational aggression is really to control the social rewards within that group, and it can result in increases in status. And these behaviours can involve things like ignoring or turning your back on someone, making negative facial expressions, gossiping, spreading rumours, playing practical jokes, making fun of someone, purposefully excluding or leaving a peer out from a social event or activity. And things like refusing to sit near someone or controlling the behaviours of the group to exclude someone. So it's really about positioning yourself as having more resources than somebody else.
And we see this incredibly painful for our students or our teenagers, where they are left out on the seating plan on the bus, and whoever's in the power dynamic or the more powerful person in the group will make sure everyone's paired up, and they'll leave someone out, or they will buy something for everyone from the canteen and then just go, oh, sorry, Susie, I don't have money for you, so you don't get it today. And I think we do see this in boys as well as girls. You just mentioned there the practical jokes where boys can be really cruel and mean, and girls, and then just go, oh, but I was only joking. Can't you take a joke? Are those kind of ideas of relational aggression that you have seen?
Absolutely. Boys do this as well. And the reason why my book is titled The Popular Girls is because I've worked mostly with girls. I have daughters, I have sisters. So the examples came easily to mind when I was writing.
As Mary mentions, a lot of her experience and work comes from the female perspective. But she emphasizes that this does not mean boys don't struggle with friendships, because there can sometimes be a perception that popularity affects females more than males. The American Psychological Association's Chief Science Officer, Mitch Prinstein, talks about how both boys and girls internalize and are affected by messages about likable and status popularity. Links to his 2017 book Popular and his recently co-authored book Likeability can be found in the show notes. Isn't it fascinating, as human beings, we don't tend to compare ourselves downward. We always tend to look upward and see what we're not achieving, what we're not getting. And perhaps is that some of the driving force between our young people and this popularity status, feeling as though the people at the top are the ones that have it all, and that's what we should be aiming for?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's certainly driving a bit of that I'm not enough that is really affecting our young people, that sense that they're not worthy, that they're not enough, by looking to external markers for their success. And they may be seeing that status popularity as being a marker of success. And that's part of the reason why I wrote the book, was because I really want parents and educators and young people themselves to be aware that social success is not the same as status seeking. They're two completely different concepts. And moving young people towards connections is an incredibly important thing. It's related to a number of health markers, and so it's really important to understand the difference.
And so, Mary, you talk about the popularity paradox and the brain in your book. Can you just talk about what's going on in the brain with popularity seeking?
Yeah, so there's a lot happening in the adolescent brain. As you know, there's the back of the brain starts first in the renovation with the emotion centre, but also with social rewards centre and pleasure seeking. And so there's parts of the brain that are about wanting status that develop before the frontal lobes and the prefrontal cortex, which is involved in decision making and rational thinking. So there is something about that this is a developmentally risky period for engaging in those behaviours, just as it is also a really vulnerable period for loneliness, which is why it's really important that we're having this conversation about connection, and for mental health problems. So what we know is that the Australian Bureau of Statistics for the 2021 period found that 39.6% of adolescents have experienced a mental disorder. So really, really high levels. And we've been aware of that before COVID, so you might be thinking, oh, this is a result of COVID. But in our profession, we've been talking about loneliness for a little while now before COVID, and recognising the links between loneliness and mental health disorders. And what we know is that adolescents, although they're one of the two highest risk vulnerable periods for loneliness, is that they're surrounded by all of these young people. So loneliness is really a subjective experience, and then that is directly linked to physical and mental health problems.
We are made for relationships, but people who our teens think of as the popular group can often be lonely because their focus is on status rather than connection. Although our teens have different interests and social needs to us, it's important to help them think about quality rather than quantity in terms of friendships. If your teen is struggling to make good friends, this is when we look at their interests and hobbies, and we help them connect with a tribe, which can often be those that are outside of their school community. But it's good to encourage connections both inside and outside of school.
So we need to keep coming back to what are healthy connections? Why are our young people feeling disconnected? Really thrashing this out a little bit more.
Then, Mary, in terms of relational aggression, I see you also talk about the importance of pro-social behaviours, and I teach pro-social behaviours at the university and what that is. And essentially, it's about teaching young people to do things that are life-giving and kind and hopeful. But I found it fascinating where you spoke about sometimes people can use pro-social behaviours as a cloak, in a sense that they're not necessarily being pro-social or kind. They're actually using these behaviours as a way of getting ahead. Can you give us a few examples of what you mean by that?
Okay, so what came out in the literature that I was reading was that those young people that were using quite high levels of coercive or relational aggressive behaviours were also able to use really high levels of pro-social behaviours. Using both of those strategies together is actually indicated in achieving status. So pro-social behaviours are actually one way that you can gain status really quickly and really effectively because you've got the support of the group and that gives you power. But to have all those social resources, if you're on the stairs, it still needs to be managed because somebody has it when somebody doesn't have it. Yeah, so using those two kinds of behaviours together is what actually seems to be a feature of status popularity.
Oh, wow. And so how do you talk with young people, with their parents, about using pro-social behaviours but in a positive way?
What I tend to do is go right back to the two different perspectives of the field and the staircase, or vertical and horizontal relationships, because people really seem to understand that, and they're very fundamentally different mindsets about relationships. So that's the first thing, is explaining the difference. But it's also really important that parents understand that healthy connections underlie so many markers of well-being in our young people that it's something that we need to be aiming for. We need to be setting goals around it. And I think that sometimes in the competitive society that we live in, with there being so much marketing, it gets really confusing as a parent to know how you should be encouraging, or what you should be encouraging your young person to do, or what social success looks like. And that likable popularity looks like wanting to get to know another person, making another person feel valued, being interested in being fair, kind, and equitable in relationships, being more concerned with mutual respect and building trust with others than status. And often to develop that, they first need to separate who they are from what outcomes they achieve. So the rating of success being external markers such as, awards, appearance, popularity, future earning capacity is part of the I'm not enough crisis that is happening with young people. So some of the things that we can do is separate the external markers of success from who they are, and knowing that they are enough and worthy, because who they are remains in their control. Another thing that parents can do is they can model and communicate about what are healthy relationships. And this can involve helping teens set goals to be part of a group of friends where they feel accepted and appreciated. So teaching teens to have a positive impression about themselves so they know they are worthy of mutual respect in relationships. And it might also involve moving away from relationships where there is that push and pull power dynamic, such as someone who may be nice but then ignoring them when they're with more popular friends, or where they need to do things to fit in that may lead them in an inauthentic direction. And likewise, for young people to learn how to be a good friend to others. So not just not understanding what it is to, how somebody should be treating them that looks like a real friendship, but how they can be that back to others. And that can involve accepting and appreciating friends, including their quirks or imperfections, and learning to value others as different but equals. And that can mean being less gossipy and exclusive, and moving more towards being more secure in relationships.
I love how you spoke about modeling there, because that's something we actually have some control of as parents. Encouraging our children not to be gossips, but are we gossips? What's coming out of our mouths? How do we treat people around us? What do our children hear us say about people in our sphere? And I know it's so tricky, because for young people, they want to be part of a group, they want to belong. And like you said, we are made to connect as human beings. That is who we are. And when we're not connected, we see all these negative results in our young people's lives when they're not connected. And you highlighted there how important it is to talk to our young people about what does a friend look like? What does it look like to be a good friend? And how can you be that to others? Do you have any advice for some of your teenagers who you see in your practice who might come in and they're really struggling to make friends? What is your advice for young people around that?
First of all, I would want to get some more information around what it is that the barrier might be. But in my book, I do talk about 7 steps that parents can help young people with. So I can just transfer that information to be relevant to a young person. And if I just go over those 7 steps, in helping them work out who they are, which is about giving them personal power, it's about giving them access to their inner resources rather than needing to control other people. It's really moving them towards them being in control of being the best version of themselves. That one thing I often check with people is their level of self-compassion. So how compassionate a young person is towards themselves. And that's because relationships can be messy and complicated, and we all make mistakes.
What does that look like? How do you help a young person practically to demonstrate self-compassion?
Okay, so there are 3 main components to self-compassion, and one is mindfulness. The other is common humanity, which is very much about being on the flat field, and self-kindness. So depending where a young person gets stuck there might be where I would really, thrash out how to do that.
That, even for our listeners, when someone comes to see you or someone came to see me, it's very individual for that child. And that's why we often encourage people to see a professional, because then you can work out that child's personality, interaction style, and you work with them. So I appreciate that it's complex.
Yeah, but when a young person is able to be compassionate to themselves, when they're able to do that mindfulness and develop emotional intelligence and apply self-compassion, understand that sometimes when they suffer and fail, that's part of being connected as being a human, that in being kinder to themselves, sometimes they're able to then increase their compassion for other people as well. And this is where also parents can play a large role, because how compassionate a parent is to themselves, their young person actually experiences that as well. And that can be a really important experience.
You heard us talk about modeling behaviors and connecting with our teens. Parents also have such opportunities for positive influence on teens' views on likable versus status popularity. Findings from a recent study tell us that teens' perceptions of their friends, the media, and their parents' views affects their social behaviors. So if you are self-conscious, aggressive with others, or constantly seeking approval, your teens pick up on these things. Whereas if you demonstrate likable popularity with your neighbours and your own peers, your teens will see these too.
It counteracts shame, and there is some indication that relational aggression is about shame, which is fear of being normal, or, thinking that they have to, the messages that society is giving young people about they have to be the elite or better or at the top of the stairs.
Normal doesn't cut it. You can't be normal. You have to be the super person, the influencer, and so on.
Yeah, that I think that our society is giving young people a lot of messages like that. And some of those messages are really contributing to, come on, we're not on a field, we really are on the stairs. An experience of secure attachment style is incredibly important when it comes to relationships.
Yeah, that keeps coming up in the literature, that the secure attachment with the parent, even one adult in a young person's life, is significant.
Absolutely. And that becomes the template for how they interact with other people. And there is some indication, I did read some studies around that attachment style is meaningfully connected to relational aggression. What is it, about 40% of the population reports being insecurely attached? So we've got securely attached, insecurely attached, and within insecurely attached, avoidant and anxious, and a few other little areas there. But when a young person is securely attached, their view on the world starts to change. Something that a young person seems to benefit from is really feeling that they are loved and that they're safe in relationships, because there is something about being on the stairs, which is that scarcity mindset. It's about being unsafe. It's about, I could fall, or I've got to work really, really hard to get up higher.
So when they come home, they can breathe because they feel, okay, here I'm loved and I'm safe, as you said.
Yeah, and I'm enough. And I'm enough. And we know that Daniel Siegel, he talks about the 4 S's. He talks about safe, seen, seen, secure, and soothed. So the soothed overlaps with the self-compassion that I was just talking about, and understanding that actually young people's first experience of compassion often comes through their even pre-verbal with their parents, with their early carers. But understanding that when that happens, things start to change for young people. They start to expect that other people, that they start to become warmer with other people. They interact with other people differently because they expect that they're safe with other people. So then they treat other people in a way that starts a cycle of really positive, healthy relationships and giving people the benefit of the doubt. Whereas if somebody's untrusting in their really close relationships, and it may very well be, I think we live in a society where parents are working so hard, they're often not available, or they're so exhausted when they come home that they can't see, they're not actually seeing their young person, because by seeing their young person, that means seeing their emotions, seeing their struggle, seeing their suffering, seeing the challenges that are happening in their life. So when that doesn't happen, it's hard for a young person to know how to do that in their friendships, or to know that their friendships aren't giving them that either. Yeah, and part of that story, so the other steps, so then if we go to step 4, is about gratitude. So bringing positive emotions, play and enjoyment to just being human, that needs to be part of our story too, because we do have suffering in life. We also need to have that. We need to have that positive emotion. And teens are some of the most creative and fun people on the planet. And incorporating gratitude and positive emotion into their identity has numerous benefits, as well as understanding character traits. So, with Martin Seligman's, we've got 24 character strengths. At the top 4 or 5 are what we refer to as our signature strengths, and that everybody brings a different mix of inherent strengths to situations. Now, all of these techniques that I talk about are not about, I'm going to use my strengths, so I'm climbing those stairs. It's about I'm using those strengths because when I walk alongside all the other humans, they've all got 5 really special strengths as well. So my strengths don't make me any better than anyone else, because we all have different strengths that we use in different ways that help us achieve great things in our lives, and that different people achieve great things in different ways in different places. And that is success. So what I do with young people is I get them to fill in the signature strengths questionnaire, and I write their top strengths. And when there is a difficulty, I shine the spotlight on their positive strengths for managing that. Or when there is a goal that they want, we focus on what are those strengths. But again, each of these little things that we're touching on, Collett, as you'd be aware, have massive amounts of literature behind them, and techniques and strategies that we're just not doing them justice in this conversation. But it's so important for young people to have this story of who they are. We need to change our perspective about how we fit with other human beings, so that we can fit with other human beings in a way that is really nurturing. And so that's why actually step 6 is about the experience of interconnectedness, because there's been something that's happened in our society where we're disconnected from ourselves, from others, and from the wider environment.
Yeah, it's fascinating that a lot of the research on green space and, looking at nature and looking at green, that does something for our well-being.
And then step 7 is really about helping young people work out their values. And sometimes that can be a little bit tricky because young people have limited experiences, and sometimes it is our experiences that lead to our perspective. I know that's certainly been the case with me, that having gone through difficult times completely changes how I think about the world, or how it helps me make decisions about how I want to interact with the world, who I want to be. So starting to get young people to think about those kinds of questions, because often the things that they're striving for are needs substitutes. So when they say, I want to be famous, if you actually start questioning what would change in your life if you were famous, what is the outcome of being famous that you so desperately want? It never ceases to amaze me. It always comes down to connection. Then they will be loved. Then there'll be, and I think that there's some kind of confusion in our society about the difference between being loved and being admired. That there's something about that need to be at the top of the stairs is about, I need to be admired, but what they really want is to be loved. And then the people that get kicked to the bottom of the stairs think that they're not worthy of love. And the people at the top go, hey, wait up, this isn't what I expected. I wanted to be loved and I'm not feeling loved. I'm not satisfied here. So really helping young people with thinking about what their values are, and then connecting it to goals, because values and goals are 2 separate things. when these things come together, we've got young people who know who they are and who have access to personal power. And what that looks like is then if someone doesn't like them or someone doesn't want to hear their message or they want someone else, that they'll be better able to accept that because, in fact, they'll want to have relationships and be involved in activities that are authentic and honest. And I'm not knocking popularity here at all because likeable popularity, oh my goodness, the outcomes associated with that are phenomenal. And that is about, being able to make room for the uncomfortableness of being around people who are different, regulating emotions, treating people with respect. That there are just phenomenal outcomes from that.
I think what's fascinating though, Mary, is that I know one of the most painful things for me as a mum and then also in my practice is seeing young people going through their own painful experiences. But what you're touching on there is so often it's those painful experiences, as much as we wish our kids wouldn't go through them, they're the ones that often teach them, oh, this is what a good friend doesn't look like. And so this is how I could be different next time. And I could reach out to other people and really tap into the likable popularity. I want to reach out to the people who are different or who are the underdogs or who need kindness. Yeah, I love this concept of likable popularity.
Absolutely. And being discriminated against, I know that when that's happened in my life, it gave me this really strong conviction. I will never do that to anybody, and I actually won't be a bystander to it either. Often people are bystanders. I mean, there's a number of reasons. Often there's confusion. Often, there are thoughts like it's none of my business. But there is also your status gets knocked down. There is massive personal cost for you. And then people get confused, young people get confused about, because there are then two values at play here, group loyalty. You might be part of this popular group that's just cut someone out of organised a party and made sure that one person didn't know about it and, or gossiped and whatever. That it's that value of, well, am I loyal to my group, which is, consistent with our values in our culture? Or am I about fairness or equity or respect for that person? And that's also what I love about the flat field analogy, is because aren't we all in the same group? Isn't it time that we all start saying, whatever you do to the most vulnerable in this group, you are doing to me, because we're all interconnected and they're part of my group too.
Beautiful. So, Mary, just to finish off, I ask all of my guests this. What is your hope for teenagers?
Well, I would really love that. My hope for young people in general is I want to see that movement, and I want to see it in my lifetime, and I want to see it sooner rather than later, where we recognise that healthy connections underlie our most fundamental needs, where we stop mistreating, people through social cruelty. There are really inspirational people in this space, such as yourself and Steve Biddulph and, Maggie Dent and Ben Crow. There's all these people that inspire and encourage me, because even though it may seem that I've gone in a different direction in writing The Popular Girls, we're all about the same thing, and that is healthy connections and what that looks like, rather than what society has told us it is.
This way of completely reframing the idea of what popularity is really struck me. My producer and I have always held the idea that popularity was more about status. In movies and media, the ones that are popular are often the bullies who put others down to push themselves up that staircase. But if you think about it, why are we classifying the bullies as the popular group? Whereas there are many teens who are kind, considerate, compassionate, and would fall into the likable popularity category. These things that lead to likable popularity are actually things everyone can do. We need to loudly celebrate likable popularity so much more in our homes. If you would like to find out more about Mary's book, The Popular Girls, or more about her work, you can find her at thepopulargirls.org. You can also find me or leave a question for a future episode via email or my Facebook page or via raisingteens.au. Or you can go to the Hope 1032 podcast page. Please subscribe and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'd love to see you next episode, and in the meantime, keep parenting with your teen's future adult in mind.
This episode was hosted by Collett Smart, edited and produced by Alec Green, imaging by Lucy Weil, and social media by Beth Rivers.
Hope 1032. Thanks for listening.